November 28, 2020. It's Saturday night in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, a peaceful suburb on the outskirts of Philadelphia.
The population is approximately 18,000 people.
Lansdale is an area where a lot of people come to build their families. It's where people go to stay away from violence or crime.
But for one neighborhood, this night will be anything but peaceful.
At 10 o'clock that night, a resident was letting his dog out when he heard what sounded like gunshots.
Racing to the front of his home, he spots one car racing away, and another crashed into a pole.
The car looks like it's been in an accident, but with the gunshots, it's the suspicious situation.
He cautiously approaches the vehicle, where he finds the driver slumped over at the wheel.
She looks unresponsive.
Miss.
Getting no response, he immediately calls 911.
He lets the police know what he heard and what he's seen.
Within minutes, first responders are on the scene.
The car is still running. They reach in, turn the car off, and put it in park.
They find a purse. An ID inside identifies the driver as Ebony Pack.
"30-year-old Ebony Pack grew up surrounded by a loving brood of siblings and cousins.
We had a great childhood. We was all raised as like brothers and sisters. We was very close. When we are around each other, that's our happy place.
Though small in stature, Ebony seemed like she stood 6 feet tall.
She had such a big heart. You could always go to Eb. She was always there for you, like no matter what.
She was everybody's shoulder, everybody's crutch. She was so compassionate.
With these gifts, no one was surprised when after high school, Ebony announced her plans to become a nurse.
That was her goal from the jump. She was going to Holy Family for the nursing program.
But in Ebony's freshman year of college, her life took an unexpected turn.
She got pregnant. She had to drop out of college and raise her daughter.
Along the way, she was fortunate to have the support of her baby's father.
Jeff was cool. He was funny. They was good. You know, every relationship is not perfect, but I never saw any negative things happen with them.
As a mother, Ebony was a natural.
She loved Ava so much. It was like second nature to her because she already nurtured everybody around her.
She just took on it with such grace and like finesse. She was a damn good mother.
But before long, heartbreak struck.
Ava's father went to jail for murder.
He was someone that she thought was going to be around for a very long time. She now has to pick up the pieces while raising a young child.
It was a sad situation for her and her daughter.
But with the support of her family, Ebony pulled through.
She came back home. She went back to school. She became a nurse.
She had a lot of strong Black women around her that uplifted her during this time. In spite of all of the difficulties that she faced, she still had that go-getter spirit.
But Ebony's career wasn't the only big change in her life. She was also spending a lot of time with a new friend named Brittany Norman.
She was always in West Philly with Brittany. And we started to see, like, this isn't regular friendship. And I said, Ebony, are y'all, like, together? And she got quiet for a little bit, and she started crying, and I started crying, and I said, you didn't have to keep that from me. I love you no matter what.
Her acceptance encouraged Ebony to also tell her family.
We were basically raised in church. So I think that added level of that kind of moral compass. So I don't think she necessarily wanted to hide it, but I think she wasn't comfortable outrightly saying it.
But when the relationship was finally out in the open, it was pure joy for Ebony.
Brittany made Ebony happy.
Together, they built a beautiful blended family.
Next thing you know, they're getting married.
It was not too long after they legalized gay marriage.
And they were able to support one another with raising each other's children.
But in early 2020, after 5 happy years together, the couple decided to separate.
It just couldn't work because Eb and Brittany are just totally different people.
But Ebony would have no time to wallow as the COVID pandemic quickly took hold.
She worked on the COVID unit. She thrived at it. She really did.
Even when I couldn't touch them, she made them feel like, I'm still in the room with you, you're still a person, and I still love you, and I'm caring for you. She was the best nurse.
When the COVID confinement finally ended, Ebony couldn't wait to jump back into normal life.
Eb was just a different person, but in like a good way.
Her priority was like being happy and having fun.
And a trip to Miami with her nursing colleagues would change her life forever.
They did a private dinner the first time they got there.
She meets a woman named Katrina Randolph.
So why hasn't anyone introduced us before?
I know, right?
They meet, they talk, they get familiar.
Katrina talks about recently getting out of a 3-year relationship with a man.
They find comfort in one another by sharing each other's stories and being supportive and understanding.
Wait, where you been?
Where have you been?
And by the time they came home, Katrina knew she wanted to be with Ebony.
Katrina was saying to her, oh, you're gonna be my girlfriend. I guess like Ebony was not used to being like the one that's like the girly girl, like somebody seeking after. I think it piqued her interest.
And Katrina certainly knew how to woo Ebony.
I got to see her come home with flowers that cost like $200. And I just saw her excited about being like, getting like the princess treatment.
Once the two became a couple, things moved quickly.
They started dating in July. They was already talking about moving in with each other in October. She seemed very happy.
But now, Ebony's life hangs in the balance.
First responders quickly discovered bullet wounds all over her body, including several shots to the chest.
Charlie 20, go ahead and start me at 47 for an unresponsive female with a gunshot wound. Her name is Ebony Pack.
After separating from her wife, Ebony Pack had found love again with a woman named Katrina Randolph.
She was happy.
She was just really living her best life.
Ma'am, are you okay?
But now her life is in jeopardy.
Somebody shot into the vehicle where Ebony was.
There were bullet holes in her body.
While she's raced to the hospital, investigators contact Ebony's family.
Lansdale, the police station, called me, and I'm like, please just tell me if it's bad. And she was like, I can't. I just would say, get to the hospital as soon as you can. So my mom went, and I said, I'll stay here with the kids.
Get to the hospital, they like, she has surgery. The doctors come out here and talk to you in a minute. So my anxiety was like 100.
Back at the crime scene, detectives have arrived and begun examining evidence.
They note that even though Ebony's vehicle crashed into a pole, there is little damage to it.
That would say it rolled into that position and was not actually driven into that position. There wasn't major impact like somebody was racing or something like that. So that evidence is very important.
There are also 9mm shell casings outside of the vehicle.
The bullets came from outside. They shot into the vehicle.
Though police have little to go on, they don't believe this was a random shooting.
This is not in the inner city.
The reputation of the area is very peaceful and very calm.
which explains why so many neighbors have begun to gather at the scene.
Lansdale is the kind of place where people are gonna come out and insert themselves into the investigation. This is a see something, say something kind of neighborhood. It is a community of law and order, and they wanna help.
Hey, how you doing?
As does the 911 caller, who's the first witness investigators interview.
The neighbor was outside with their dog when he heard gunshots.
I heard gunshots, so I went to the front of the house, and it was a car that just sped off.
You saw a car? Can you tell us what it looked like?
The man said that he couldn't get a good glimpse of it, but based on the tail light description, it looked like it was a Cadillac.
As investigators make the rounds with other neighbors, this is quickly confirmed.
Another witness confirmed that it was in fact a Cadillac.
It's a lead detectives desperately needed, as their case has just turned into a homicide.
The fact they come out and tell me my daughter was dead. She was shot 13 times. It took the life out of me. Took the life out of me.
My mom called me. I just remember hearing her say, they killed her. And I said, what? And she said they killed her. I screamed because I couldn't help it.
By now, investigators have arrived at the hospital, where they meet with Ebony's grief-stricken mother.
Do you know anyone who would want to do something like this?
No, I don't know no one would want to hurt my daughter.
She just didn't understand, like, how this could happen.
Ebony just didn't bother nobody. She never got into altercations. She would never hurt anybody. She would pray for somebody before she do anything.
You're talking about a 30-year-old nurse who's a mother. This is a person that is not leading the kind of lifestyle that would lend to essentially a drive-by shooting.
Do you know anyone who drives a Cadillac?
No, I don't.
But when detectives ask about Ebony's personal life, her mother mentions something that could be important to the case.
Well, she's going through a difficult divorce.
There were problems, there were issues.
Ebony wanted to file for divorce, but Brittany didn't.
You have an estranged wife, which is always a good place to at least begin.
The mother of murder victim Ebony Pack has just told Lansdale detectives that Ebony was going through a difficult divorce.
She wanted to get out, but I don't think Brittany wanted to end her marriage.
Her mother explains that in the beginning, the two women were deeply in love.
She was happy at first.
Her family, however, wasn't.
Nobody really got down with Brittany.
Brittany was always so overbearing
Because we love Ebony that much, and because we felt like Ebony loves her, we tolerate her.
To her mother, it seemed Brittany put too much on Ebony's shoulders.
Ebony did everything in the relationship, far as financially wise. Like, both of y'all are grown women. You know, you can't carry the weight of everything all the time.
To the point where Ebony's mother found Brittany abusive.
It was not physically abusive, but probably mentally abusive.
Brittany just wanted to control Ebony, and Ebony couldn't be herself when she was around.
She wouldn't let Ebony go anywhere by herself. She just had to be there.
To her family's relief, Ebony eventually called it quits.
Ebony had decided to break up and to come back home.
She was tired of being a provider. She was, I guess you could say, over Brittany.
The weight has been lifted off of her, and she just felt free.
But Ebony's mother says post-separation, a new point of contention arose between them.
Ebony has a new love in her life.
A woman named Katrina Randolph.
And Brittany didn't like that.
She was calling my mom about who is this girl Ebony's with. She's gonna smack them when she see them.
Which makes investigators suspect this could be a love triangle gone wrong.
Do you think Brittany would be capable of something like this?
At first I didn't, but after this, I'm not sure.
As I talked to the detectives, Brittany became a strong thought.
What about Katrina? Do you know what she thought of Brittany?
I don't know.
But Ebony's mother shares her reservations about Katrina as well.
Her energy was off. She was possessive. I remember Ebony telling me she's not all the way there. Like Katrina chased somebody with a hammer before. That girl got some anger issues.
Under the circumstances, detectives need to speak with both women.
You have to look at both of them. New love, old love.
Well, we're very sorry for your loss, okay? We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Both Brittany and Katrina are potential suspects in this crime.
Police reach Brittany first, and she agrees to come in for an interview first thing the following morning.
Face to face with detectives, Brittany appears devastated by her ex-wife's death.
I can't believe this happened to someone like Eb.
She knew Ebony's character and she knew that she was a good person.
Yet she doesn't deny there were tensions between them.
Brittany makes it very clear that yes, they had problems. Yes, there were arguments, but it wasn't to the point where she was some bitter, jealous ex. She knew about Katrina. She knew Ebony wanted to move on.
I didn't have no problem with them seeing each other.
But Brittany admits there was one thing Ebony was doing that she wasn't okay with.
Sometimes my daughter would be with her and she'd take her to Katrina's house, so we would argue about that.
She openly admitted that she didn't like that, and they got into arguments about it. But Brittany was adamant that she didn't have anything to do with this murder.
Well, where were you last night then?
I was with friends.
All right. Well, before we let you go, do you know anyone with a Cadillac?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming in. If we have any other questions, we will get back to you.
Not long after Brittany leaves the station, Katrina comes in for questioning.
She had already heard from family and friends about Ebony's murder, and she said she was sleepless over it.
And that's when she makes a jaw-dropping revelation.
I think I know who killed her.
Katrina says my ex-boyfriend may have had something to do with this.
Katrina Randolph, the girlfriend of 30-year-old Ebony Pack, has just told Lansdale detectives that she fears her ex-boyfriend may be behind the murder.
And what's your ex's name?
Ling Dan.
Katrina and Ling had a very toxic relationship.
They had dated for 3 years.
She leaned on him for finances.
But when she finally broke things off, he refused to accept it.
He consistently stalked her, showed up to her job, consistently called her.
And discovering she was dating someone else only fanned the flames.
He was not happy about her leaving him, and specifically not happy about her leaving him for another woman.
Which Katrina believes is what triggered his sudden demand for her to return all the money he'd given her.
And how much money are we talking?
Over the years, like $19,000, but I didn't have it all.
She could only give him $10,000.
Not long after, someone broke into her home, and Katrina immediately suspected Ling.
Things that were stolen from her home just so happened to be things that Ling had purchased for her.
Did you report this to the police?
No.
Why not?
She didn't feel like she could because she didn't have any proof that he specifically did it.
Although Katrina admits that wasn't the only reason.
There was a pattern and a history of abuse.
And Katrina says that one night, Ling went too far.
She recalls she's pumping gas in her car one evening.
Ling shows up, gets inside her car where the keys are still in her ignition.
He gets into her purse trying to take money.
Ling, what are you doing? Get.
She gets in the passenger side and confronts him.
Ling, get out my car.
Hell no. Hell no.
To the point that he basically hijacks the car with her in it.
Hell no. I'm taking you. I'm taking this car.
In a panic, she climbs in the back seat and tries to call somebody for help.
Who you calling? Is that Ebony? Better tell your girl to watch her back.
He said he's gonna do something to Ebony if Katrina don't give him his money back.
Eventually, Katrina says Ling gave her a chance to escape.
Ling goes to a store and gets out to go make a purchase. She takes her car back.
Don't move.
Shaken, Katrina knew she had to take action.
She had to take a restraining order out on him.
To detectives, Katrina's theory sounds plausible, but they aren't sure she's telling the whole truth.
She has been described as someone who is controlling. What if she had become angry with Ebony and had harmed her? Could she be using Ling Dan as a scapegoat?
But when pressed, Katrina insists she and Ebony were in a good place.
She makes it very clear that her relationship with Ebony was fine.
And you didn't have any issues with her speaking with her ex-wife?
No. Why would I? I'm the one she wants to be with.
They were in love. They were inseparable.
In fact, she says that she and Ebony were planning to meet the night of the murder.
She said Ebony had called her around 9:30 to let her know she was just 10 minutes from her house. As time passed and Ebony didn't show up, Katrina got worried. She tried to call her and got no response.
But I never ever thought she would be dead.
Before wrapping their interview with Katrina, they ask if Ling drives a Cadillac.
Does he drive a Cadillac?
He doesn't.
And she doesn't know of anyone else who does either.
Detectives know they need to speak with Ling Dan. However, when they try to track him down, it seems he's in the wind.
No one knows where he is.
At the same time, investigators get a potential break in the case.
They are given access to the surveillance records from the toll road that Ebony would have taken to get to Katrina's house that night.
They found a car that followed her through the toll. It was a Cadillac.
Zooming in, investigators discover a Delaware license plate with a dealership name on it.
When they run the plates, they turn out to be fake. But when they contact the dealership, they have better luck.
They were able to confirm that they recently sold a Cadillac of this make and model.
The buyer was a man by the name of Ricky Vance.
Lansdale investigators have traced the Cadillac they believe Ebony Pack's killer drove to a man named Ricky Vance.
He becomes a person of interest.
And after running a background check, he definitely seems capable of this kind of crime.
He served state time for carjackings. He's no stranger to violence.
In fact, he had been in prison for 20 years. He had only been out on parole for a few months.
After hauling Ricky in for questioning,
what's this all about?
Detectives waste no time confronting him.
We have evidence that your car was involved in the murder of a woman named Ebony Pack.
What are you talking about?
We have your car on camera with counterfeit plates.
He immediately confirms that, in fact, the Cadillac is his. but says he'd never put counterfeit plates on it.
He also denies knowing anyone named Ebony.
But that doesn't stop police from digging further for a connection to the crime.
Do you know someone named Ling Dan?
No, ma'am.
What about Katrina Randolph? Does that sound familiar?
Who is that?
And when asked where he was the night of the murder, he claims to have an alibi.
I was in Philly watching a boxing match with friends.
And you had the Cadillac with you in Philadelphia?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you loan it to someone?
No, ma'am.
But the evidence just doesn't support his statements. Several witnesses describe the Cadillac fleeing from the scene.
Ricky's been found lying.
And when investigators look into his alibi, Ricky's caught in yet another lie.
The alibi does not check out.
And the plot only thickens when they receive his phone records.
They quickly find text messages between him and a man named Terrence Marche discussing counterfeit plates.
They also see a series of several calls between Terrence and Ricky on the night Ebony was shot, with a gap of about 3 hours right around the time of the murder.
While the phone records don't prove Ricky was involved, they are enough to get a warrant to search his car.
They find gunshot residue on the passenger seat of the vehicle.
The shots came from the passenger side of the Cadillac and to the driver's side of her vehicle. So we know that at a minimum, 2 people have to be in the Cadillac.
With Ricky stalling, investigators haul in Terrence to see if he'll talk.
Do you know a man named Ricky Vance?
Yeah. He confirms they have been friends for about 10 years.
He also admits that he has helped Ricky with temporary tags for a car before, but denied ever getting him counterfeit plates.
Okay. And where were you Saturday night?
I was actually home alone on Saturday.
Continuing down the rabbit hole, they ask Terrence if he knows Ebony, Katrina, or Ling Dan.
Nah, no Ebony. But I know Ling, and Katrina was his old girl.
He is known for a healthy portion of time, Mr. Ling.
He also admits to knowing Katrina via Ling, but didn't have much interaction with her personally.
And Ricky knows both of them as well?
Not that I know of.
But detectives suspect Terrence is lying.
They doubt it's a coincidence that Terrence just so happens to be a link between Ricky and Ling Dan. It seems likely that all 3 had something to do with the murder.
And when detectives pull Terrence's and Ling Dan's phone records, they find their smoking gun.
The cell phone data of these 3 men put them at the same spot at 8 p.m. on the night that Ebony Path was killed.
And they suspect Ling Dan is the mastermind behind the crime.
The theory was that Ling commissioned this hit on Ebony as revenge on Katrina.
He solicited Terrence to be the gunman, who then brought in Ricky to be the driver.
Police believe after finalizing their plans, Ling Dan left the meeting alone.
Cell phone records show his phone heading across state lines into New Jersey.
Meanwhile, Ricky and Terrence turned off their phones.
It was highly suspect that they turned them off for a 3-hour period, right at the time that the murder was taking place.
With probable cause, investigators issue warrants for all 3 suspects' arrests.
At this point, you got enough evidence for conspiracy.
Then they bring Ebony's family up to speed.
They called me. Detectives always made sure that I was in the loop.
The story was so crazy to me. The whole process of hiring 2 men to kill her was just mind-blowing.
That is a deep-rooted evil man.
When Ricky Vance is apprehended, Ebony's family is overjoyed.
Our family did a cookout to celebrate.
But when investigators try to apprehend Terrence Marche, he's nowhere to be found.
Like Ling, Terrence now appears to be on a run too.
Fleeing basically says to any law enforcement agency, you are guilty.
While investigators in Lansdale, Pennsylvania have arrested Ricky Vance in the murder for hire of Ebony Pack, the two other suspects, Ling Dan and Terrence Marche, remain at large.
All we could do is pray that they didn't get away with it.
Through it all, investigators refuse to give up on the case.
Montgomery County detectives, they are pretty awesome. Like, they always call me, be patient. We're getting it done. Stuff is happening. They made it their priority to bring justice for Ebony.
And when they track down Terrence's fiancée, they get crucial information on his whereabouts.
Hello?
She had gotten a call from Terrence a few days before.
He's actually in Honduras with Ling.
They done fled the country.
Since then, his fiancée claims she'd lost touch with Terrence, though she had spoken with Ling.
Mr. Ling communicates with her that day Marche's run off.
But he also tells her that he's made a different decision. He's coming back to the U.S. to face charges.
Whether it was his guilt or his confidence that brought him home, police successfully intercept Ling Dan once he's back on U.S. soil.
He is arrested without incident.
Nearly a year later, Terrence Marche is still missing. Nonetheless, the trial of Ling Dan and Ricky Vance moves forward.
Pretty much my whole family were there every day. We showed up for her. We showed them that she was loved.
Face to face with the family, the defendants show their true colors.
Ricky Vance, because he's a loser. I think he was just following behind that man. But Ling, because he's evil, he thought he would just get away with it. Like, he was smiling the whole time with a stupid little smirk on his face. And it's just like, yuck, that man is disgusting.
The prosecution portrays Ling as the conspiracy's mastermind.
Ling hired Terrence to be the shooter, and Terrence hooked Ling up with Ricky as the driver.
A vengeful ex-lover, Ling was motivated by jealousy and dollar signs.
Katrina moved on with Ebony, and he still wanted Katrina, and he also wanted his money.
According to the prosecution, on the night of the murder, Ling, Ricky, and Terrence met up to finalize their plans.
That killing was as a result of the meeting that took place. There was a forethought, there was a plan, so there's first-degree murder.
Afterwards, Ricky and Terrence turned off their phones and followed Ebony to the scene of the crime.
Police showed evidence from the tow of the car owned by Ricky.
They followed Ebony on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which is also laden with cameras.
And as they followed her through the streets near Katrina's home, they opened fire.
They pulled up beside her and began shooting out the open window of the passenger side of the Cadillac.
She was shot 13 times.
Circumstantial evidence against the men is damning.
All the men were in the same place prior to the murder.
Not to mention Ling had fled to Honduras with Terrence.
But when it's the defense's turn, they place the blame on missing suspect Terrence Marche.
On the stand, Ricky changes his story.
He now comes forward with this theory that Marche took my car. He was acting weird. He was acting funny. He took my vehicle and came back and looked very distraught.
But on cross-examination, the prosecution rebounds with a different theory.
The only person who could essentially tell on both Ling and Vance was Terrence. So they wanted to be able to put all of this on him.
So they convinced him to go to Honduras, and then he's never heard from again.
After getting rid of Terrence, Ling comes back from Honduras. Now he and Ricky Vance can go to trial together and take the position they had absolutely nothing to do with this crime.
But the jury doesn't buy their story, convicting them of first-degree murder and conspiracy.
When they said guilty, it was like oh my goodness, like, thank you.
And at the sentencing hearing, when Ebony's mother makes her impact statement, there isn't a dry eye in the courtroom.
I let them know who they took away from us. I let them know that they weren't God, that wasn't their job. That is the worst kind of evil.
The judge makes sure they'll never see the outside of prison walls again.
They're sentenced to life in prison without parole.
But Ebony's family doesn't get the peace they expected.
Still feels like pointless. It still feels like I was robbed. We can't see Ed. We gotta go to a gravesite and talk to her.
You still have your life. You still get to see your family, even if it's behind bars.
It's just not fair. I don't think I believe in justice anymore.
To this day, Terrence Marche remains missing.
His whereabouts continue to be unknown.
Terrence Marche, go to hell, if you're not already there.
The senseless crime of these three men ruined the lives of many people. But most of all, Ebony's daughter.
It breaks my heart when I see her isolate sometimes because she missed her mom. You know, I try to comfort her the best way I can. But I know sometimes that's not good enough. I know sometimes she just wants her mother arms around her. But I believe she's going to be very well empowered for her future. She has a village, and she has a whole lot of her mother in her.
A mother whose time on earth will never be forgotten.
I want people to know how loving and caring she was, how compassionate and fun she was.
Ebony was the sweetest, kindest person you would know. I just feel blessed and honored that I got to know her. I take such pride in the fact that she was my sister. Oh, I wish everybody got to feel how it felt to be loved by Ebony. Her life is so important, and I just want people to understand that. Her name will live in our hearts and our lives forever.
In the summer of 1984, League City, Texas, looked nothing like the place people would later call the Texas Killing Fields. It was a growing community between Houston and Galveston, surrounded by highways, marshes, oil fields, and stretches of empty land. Families moved to the area every day. Workers traveled along Interstate 45, and teenagers walked to stores, restaurants, and pay phones. Yet beyond the ordinary streets was another landscape, one that could hide a terrible secret for decades. The name Texas Killing Fields would eventually become associated with a broad corridor along Interstate 45, especially an isolated area near Calder Road. The phrase sounds as though it describes one crime scene, but the reality is more complicated. Dozens of women and girls disappeared or were found dead in the wider region over many years. Investigators have never proved that every case was committed by one person. Some may have been unrelated. Others remain unsolved. But the concentration of missing and murdered women created a terrifying possibility. That predators had learned how easy it was to make someone disappear in the empty land surrounding the developing communities. One of the most haunting stories began with a 16-year-old girl named Laura Miller. Laura had recently moved with her family to League City. She was young, energetic, and still adjusting to a new neighborhood. On September 10th, 1984, she needed to make a telephone call. Her family did not yet have a working telephone in their new home, so Laura planned to use a nearby public phone. It was a task, the kind of thing that should have taken only a few minutes. Laura left home expecting to return soon. She never did. At first, her disappearance seemed like the kind of mystery that might have a simple explanation. Teenagers sometimes left home after arguments. Young people occasionally stayed with friends without telling their parents. There were countless possibilities, and in the first hours no one could know which one applied to Laura. But her family knew her. They knew this was not normal. As the hours became days, fear replaced uncertainty. Her parents began searching for her, contacting friends, asking questions, and trying to understand where she had gone. There was no message from Laura, no reassuring phone call, no explanation. Her father, Tim Miller, refused to accept that his daughter had simply vanished. Then he learned something that made the disappearance even more frightening. Another young woman, Heidi Fye, had disappeared in the same general region the previous year. Her remains were eventually discovered near Calder Road. The connection was not proof of anything, but to Laura's father it was impossible to ignore. The same roads, the same isolated landscape, another missing woman. Tim began looking beyond the search. He wanted answers, and he wanted investigators to examine the places that seemed most frightening to him. Every field and patch of brush became a possible clue. Every abandoned road seemed capable of concealing something. Meanwhile, Laura remained missing. Months passed. The family lived with the unbearable uncertainty that defines every long-term missing person case. They could not properly grieve because they did not know whether Laura was alive. They could not move forward because there was always a possibility that she might return. Her room remained part of the family home, filled with memories of a daughter who had disappeared without warning. Then, in 1986, the search produced a devastating answer. Laura's remains were discovered in the Calder Road area. The news transformed a missing person case into a homicide investigation. Laura had not run away. She had not simply chosen another life. She had been killed, and her body had been left in a remote place where someone apparently believed it could remain hidden. But the discovery created another mystery. Investigators found another set of remains in the same general area. The second victim was an unidentified woman. She became known as Jane Doe, a name used when authorities have a body but cannot determine who the person was. Her identity would remain unknown for more than 3 decades. For investigators, the discovery was disturbing. 2 female victims were now connected to the same isolated landscape. Laura Miller had vanished in 1984. The unidentified woman had also disappeared, but authorities did not yet know her story. The possibility of a serial predator became harder to dismiss. And this was only the beginning. Over the years, more bodies and more missing women would be associated with a wider region. The cases accumulated slowly, often separated by months or years. Some victims were eventually identified. Others remained unknown. Families continued waiting for information, while investigators struggled with old evidence, incomplete records, unreliable memories, and crime scenes that had changed with time. The geography itself became part of the mystery. Interstate 45 offered easy movement between Houston and Galveston. A person could enter the area quickly, disappear into the countryside, and leave without attracting much attention. The remote fields provided places where a body could remain undiscovered. In the 1980s, there were no smartphones, no surveillance cameras, and no modern databases capable of instantly connecting missing person reports across jurisdictions. For a killer, if one existed, the environment offered enormous advantages. For the families, it offered almost none. The story of the Texas killing fields would eventually become much larger than Laura Miller's case. But Laura was one of the young women whose disappearance helped reveal the pattern. Her father's refusal to stop searching would also become an important part of the story, eventually inspiring him to devote his life to helping other families search for missing loved ones. Yet in those early years, none of that was known. There was only a 16-year-old girl who had left home to make a telephone call. There was a family waiting for her to come back. And somewhere beyond the streets of League City, In a landscape that seemed empty and harmless, Laura's final journey had already begun. The discovery of Laura Miller's remains had brought her family an answer, but instead it opened a much larger and darker chapter. Laura was no longer a missing teenager. She was a murder victim, and the place where her body had been found suggested that whoever killed her had deliberately chosen an isolated landscape. Then investigators faced an even more disturbing fact. Another woman had been found nearby, but no one knew her name. The unidentified victim became known simply as Jane Doe. Her remains had been discovered in the same General Calder Road area in 1986, around the time Laura's body was recovered. Without identification, investigators had almost no way to reconstruct her final days. There was no family to interview, no confirmed address, and no clear explanation of how she had arrived there. She became another unanswered question in a case that was beginning to attract attention far beyond League City. The cases did not automatically prove the existence of a serial killer, but the pattern created a frightening possibility. Someone could have been using the empty land around League City as a dumping ground. For Laura's father, Tim Miller, the discovery changed everything. Before the remains were found, he had lived with uncertainty. Afterward, he had to confront the knowledge that his daughter had been murdered. Grief was accompanied by anger, because knowing Laura was dead did not mean knowing who had killed her. Tim began studying other disappearances. He learned about women and girls who had vanished along the Houston to Galveston corridor. Some had been found dead. Others were still missing. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that Laura's case could not be viewed in isolation. The landscape itself became a central character in the investigation. Interstate 45 connected large cities, but also passed through long stretches of undeveloped property. Side roads could lead into fields, marshes, wooded areas, and abandoned spaces where very few people had reasons to go. In the 1980s, technology offered investigators little protection against such isolation. There were no smartphones tracking movements, no widespread surveillance cameras, and no modern genetic genealogy databases capable of linking distant relatives to unidentified remains. A person could disappear between one town and another, and a disappearance might not immediately attract the attention it deserved. That vulnerability was especially frightening for young women who traveled alone. The wider region soon produced another tragic story. Audrey Lee Cook, a 30-year-old woman, disappeared in 1985. Her remains were discovered in the Calder Road area in 1986, but investigators could not immediately determine who she was. Like the earlier unidentified victim, she became a Jane Doe, waiting inside the system for someone to recognize her. For decades, Audrey's family lived without certainty. They did not know where she had gone. They did not know whether she had suffered. They did not know where her remains were. And they did not even know that the unidentified woman discovered in League City was their missing relative. That kind of uncertainty can become its own form of suffering. Families search photographs, old records, newspapers, and memories, hoping that one detail will finally explain what happened. They wait for a telephone call from authorities. They learn to live with silence. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining the growing collection of cases associated with the corridor. Some victims have been found in Galveston County. Others were discovered farther north. Their circumstances differed, and investigators repeatedly warned that the cases should not automatically be treated as one connected series. The phrase captured the fear surrounding the region, but it also concealed the complexity of the investigation. There was no single crime scene, no confirmed list of victims belonging to one murderer, and no simple timeline. Instead, there were decades of disappearances and deaths, scattered across a large area and investigated by different agencies. Then came another disappearance. Donna Gonsolin Prudhomme had lived a complicated life. She was a mother of 2 sons and had experienced serious problems in her marriage. At one point, she left her husband and placed her children with her grandmother while she attempted to rebuild her own life. She eventually lived in the Clear Lake area. Donna remained in contact with members of her family, which made her disappearance particularly painful. In 1989, she contacted her sister and requested a copy of her birth certificate because she needed it for travel. Her sister sent the document. After that, Donna vanished. Her family did not immediately know what had happened. There was no body No final explanation, and no clear answer about where she had gone. Years passed before authorities would understand that Donna had become another victim associated with the Texas killing fields. In 1991, human remains were discovered in the Calder Road area. Once again, investigators had a dead woman without a confirmed identity. She was given another temporary name, Janet Doe. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. 4 women were now tied to the same haunting landscape: Heidi Fye, Laura Miller, Audrey Cook, and the unidentified remains that would eventually be recognized as Donna Prudhomme. Yet the investigation still lacked its most important piece: a killer. Witnesses aged, memories faded, evidence deteriorated. People who might have known something moved away or died. Some suspects could no longer be questioned. But the investigation did not completely disappear. Technology was slowly changing. DNA analysis was becoming more powerful too. And decades after these women vanished, scientists would begin finding a way to give names back to the unidentified dead. That breakthrough would eventually reveal the identities of women who had waited more than 30 years to be recognized. But identifying the victims was only the beginning. The harder question remained: who had taken them into the darkness? And why had the fields of League City become their final destination? The discovery of the unidentified remains near Calder Road changed the investigation, but it did not provide the answer investigators desperately needed. There was still no confirmed killer, no reliable eyewitness, and no single piece of evidence that could explain why several women had disappeared in the same broad region. The mystery was becoming larger than any individual case. For years, investigators had to work with evidence collected during a different era. Crime scenes were not preserved with the same technology available today. Missing person databases were fragmented, photographs were stored in physical files, and forensic science could not extract the information that modern investigators now consider routine. When a woman disappeared, her case might remain within one police department rather than immediately being compared with disappearances across neighboring counties. That separation created an enormous obstacle. The Houston and Galveston region was expanding rapidly. Interstate 45 carried thousands of vehicles between major communities, while undeveloped property remained scattered around the highway. Someone could leave a populated neighborhood and reach an isolated road within minutes. The contrast between civilization and wilderness was striking. Houses, businesses, and shopping centers could exist only a short distance from fields where almost nobody traveled. The landscape created another problem. The area changed constantly. Construction altered roads. Vegetation grew over old paths. Property boundaries shifted. Places that had once been empty became neighborhoods or commercial developments. A crime scene discovered years later could look completely different from the way it had looked when a victim was first abandoned there. Yet families remembered. They remembered their daughters disappearing that night. They remembered the clothes they wore and the friends they planned to meet. Among those families was the Miller family. Laura's father, Tim Miller, could not accept that his daughter's death should become another forgotten file. After Laura's remains were discovered, his grief became inseparable from a determination to help other families searching for missing loved ones. He began investigating disappearances and eventually became deeply involved in organized searches for missing people. The tragedy that had destroyed his own family became the reason he devoted himself to helping others. But while Tim was searching for answers, investigators were still confronting the unidentified woman found near Laura. Her remains were eventually identified as those of Audrey Lee Cook, a woman who had disappeared in 1985. The discovery finally gave investigators a personal history to examine. Audrey had lived in the Houston area and had connections to ordinary people. Her disappearance was no longer anonymous. She had a family, a life, and memories attached to her name. But a name did not reveal a killer. The same problem existed with Donna Gonsolin Prudhomme. Her remains had been found in 1991, but for many years investigators did not know who she was. Her family had been living with the terrible uncertainty of a missing relative without realizing that authorities already possessed the remains of their loved one. When Donna was finally identified, investigators could reconstruct part of her life and compare them with the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. The central question remained unanswered. Was Donna connected to Laura, Was Audrey connected to Donna? Was Heidi connected to all of them? Or had several unrelated killers used the same isolated area because it was convenient? That distinction became crucial. The term Texas killing field suggested one enormous conspiracy, but investigators never established that every victim in the wider region had been murdered by one person. Some cases were separated by geography, circumstances, and time. Others appeared to share disturbing similarities. The uncertainty made the investigation both fascinating and frustrating. Then investigators began looking more closely at possible suspects. One name that emerged repeatedly was Clyde Hedrick. Hedrick lived in the region and became a person of interest in the Calder Road investigations. Another man, James Dolphs Elmore Jr., would later become connected to the investigation involving Laura Miller and Audrey Cook. For years, however, suspicion was not enough. Investigators needed evidence. The passage of time made that evidence difficult to obtain. Witnesses aged. Some had died. Others could no longer remember precise details. Physical evidence had suffered decades of environmental damage. Any surviving forensic material had to be preserved and re-examined. This is where the evolution of DNA technology became critical. In the 1980s, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Investigators could not use genetic profiles in the sophisticated ways that became possible decades later. But as forensic science advanced, old evidence could be revisited. Unidentified remains could be compared with relatives. Genetic material could be analyzed using techniques unavailable when the bodies were originally discovered. Audrey Cook and Donna Prudhomme were eventually identified through modern investigative methods. For their families, those discoveries were devastating and relieving. They finally knew. But knowing a victim's identity is different from knowing who killed her. That difference defines the tragedy of the Texas killing fields. Every identification closes one chapter while opening another. A family receives a name, a date, and a place, but then faces a question that has haunted them for decades. Who did this? Investigators face the same question. They had victims, locations, timelines, and suspects. What they did not have was a complete story. And as the years continued, another possibility began to emerge. Perhaps the answer was buried not in the fields themselves, but in the lives of the people who had lived around them. Someone had seen something. Someone had heard something. Someone might have remembered a vehicle, a conversation, or a strange encounter after a woman disappeared. The challenge was finding that person before time erased the final clues. For decades, the Texas killing fields remained suspended between mystery and memory. But modern forensic science was beginning to change the balance. The dead were finally speaking through their identities. Once the victims had names, investigators could ask a more dangerous question. Who was the last person to see them alive? That question would eventually bring investigators closer to suspects who had remained beyond reach for generations. By the late 1980s, the mystery surrounding the Texas killing fields had become more complicated than anyone in League City could have imagined. The cases were scattered across years and jurisdictions, and every new discovery seemed to raise more questions than answers. Investigators knew that several women and girls had disappeared or been found dead along the corridor between Houston and Galveston. But they could not prove that one killer was responsible for all of them. For the families of Laura Miller, Audrey Cook, Donna Prudhomme, and Heidi Fye, the uncertainty was especially painful. Their loved ones were no longer anonymous missing persons, yet the identities of their killers remained unknown. The passage of time made the investigation harder. Witnesses moved away. Memories faded. Potential suspects grew older. Physical evidence deteriorated. Still, the investigation never completely disappeared. One of the most important developments came through the determination of Laura Miller's father, Tim. After learning that his daughter had been murdered, he refused to let her story become another forgotten cold case. His search for answers eventually expanded beyond Laura. He became involved in efforts to locate other missing people, recognizing the terrible uncertainty that families experience when someone vanishes without explanation. The search for missing people also revealed just how many families were struggling with similar questions. A disappearance that seemed isolated in one county could look different when investigators examined the entire region. A woman who vanished from a roadside might have been reported to one police agency, while another missing person case was handled somewhere miles away. Without modern databases, connections were difficult to see. The geography of the region continued to complicate everything. Interstate 45 was a major transportation route, linking Houston with Galveston and other communities. A person could travel quickly between populated areas and remote stretches of land. Roads led toward fields, marshes, wooded property, and industrial sites. The environment offered privacy to anyone who wanted to conceal a crime. For investigators, every isolated location raised the same question. Was it simply an empty place, or had someone deliberately chosen it? The Calder Road cases became particularly important. The remains of several women had been discovered within a relatively concentrated area. Their deaths were separated by time, and the circumstances were not identical, but the location created an obvious pattern. One of the most difficult problems was determining whether the victims had any connection to one another. There was no simple answer. They came from different backgrounds and had different lives. They were not all traveling together, and there was no established organization linking them. A killer does not necessarily choose victims because they know each other. A predator may choose people because they share vulnerability, opportunity, or simply because circumstances bring them into the same environment. Investigators therefore began looking at the final movements of each victim. Who had spoken to Laura before she disappeared? Where had Audrey been seen? Who knew Donna's plans? Who had contact with Heidi? These questions could have solved the case if someone had remembered the right detail. But decades had passed. Meanwhile, advances in forensic science were transforming cold case investigations. DNA analysis, which had been far less developed when the original crimes occurred, became increasingly valuable. Investigators could return to old evidence and ask questions that were impossible to answer in the 1980s. Unidentified remains could also be compared with missing person records and family DNA. This became crucial for victims whose bodies had been discovered without identification. Audrey Lee Cook had spent decades without her name being connected to her remains. Donna Perdome faced a similar fate. Their families knew they had disappeared, but the connection between the missing women and the unidentified bodies remained hidden. Modern investigative techniques eventually changed that. In 2019, Audrey Cook and Donna Perdome were publicly identified as two of the women whose remains had been discovered in the Calder Road area. For their families, the discoveries brought a painful form of closure. They finally knew what had happened to their relatives. But identification was not justice. The investigators still needed a person responsible. That is where the investigation became even more difficult. When detectives examine an old homicide, they look at people who had access to the victim, knowledge of the victim's movements, or an opportunity to commit the crime. They also examine people who behaved suspiciously after the disappearance or whose statements changed over time. Several names emerged over the years in connection with the Calder Road cases. One of the most prominent was Clyde Hedrick. He became a longtime person of interest in the investigation. Another name, James Dolphs Elmore Jr., will become increasingly important much later. But suspicion alone could not produce a conviction. The law requires evidence, and old cases often contain frustrating gaps. A person can appear suspicious without being the killer. A witness can remember something incorrectly. A theory can seem convincing until another piece of evidence contradicts it. That uncertainty explains why the Texas killing fields remained unsolved for so long. There was also another problem. Not every murder or disappearance along the I-45 corridor could safely be assigned to the same offender. Investigators had to resist the temptation to connect every tragedy simply because the victims were found in the same broad region. The possibility of multiple killers remained real. This made the investigation more difficult, but also made it more credible. Instead of forcing every case into one theory, investigators could examine each victim individually while searching for genuine connections. The Calder Road cases became the strongest focus. For women had been found there over the years. Their names were now known. Their families could finally speak about them as individuals rather than unidentified victims. But another question remained buried beneath the evidence. Why Calder Road? Was it chosen because the killer knew the area? Was it simply convenient? Or did the person responsible live close enough to understand exactly how isolated those fields could become? The answers might have been hidden in the lives of local residents, former workers, acquaintances, and people who had crossed paths with the victims. As investigators continued reviewing old evidence, the possibility of using modern forensic methods became more important. Every surviving piece of evidence could potentially reveal something that investigators in 1984 or 1986 could never have seen. A tiny biological sample could become a genetic clue. An old record could reveal a forgotten connection. A witness who once seemed unimportant could suddenly become essential. The investigation had entered a new era. For decades, the Texas killing fields had seemed frozen in time, but modern technology was beginning to move the cases forward again. The victims had names. Their stories could be reconstructed. Their final movements could be examined with new tools. And then investigators began focusing more closely on the men who had lived near the victims and the fields. Among those names was James Dolphs Elmore Jr. For years, he had remained outside the public spotlight, but investigators eventually developed enough information to bring his name into the center of the investigation involving Laura Miller and Audrey Cook. The case was no longer only about unidentified remains or forgotten disappearances. It was becoming a question of accountability. More than 40 years after Laura walked away from home to make a telephone call, investigators were finally moving toward a suspect who could be placed within the story. But the evidence was complicated. The accusation would involve not only what investigators believed happened to Laura, but also what they believed Elmore did afterward. And that distinction would become critical, because solving an old murder is not simply about finding someone who looks suspicious. It is about proving, step by step, what happened. For the families who had waited for decades, that process could feel painfully slow. But after years of silence, the Texas killing fields were beginning to speak again. The next chapter would bring one of the most significant developments in the entire investigation: the emergence of a suspect whose alleged connection to Laura Miller and Audrey Cook could finally transform a decades-old mystery into a courtroom battle. The investigation entered a new and unexpected phase when investigators began looking more closely at Clyde Hedrick, a local man whose name had surfaced around the Calder Road cases for years. Hedrick was not a stranger to law enforcement. He had already been convicted in the killing of Ellen Beeson, a woman whose death occurred in the same broad region and whose circumstances had long attracted attention from investigators examining the Texas killing fields. For decades, Hedrick denied involvement in the other deaths. His name nevertheless remained difficult to ignore. Investigators believed he had knowledge of the area, and they continued examining whether he might have information about Laura Miller, Audrey Cook, Heidi Fye, and Donna Prudhomme. The renewed investigation became especially important after Galveston County District Attorney Kenneth Cusick took office in 2025. Rather than allowing the oldest cases to remain buried in inactive files, prosecutors began reviewing evidence again. Detectives returned to witnesses, statements, forensic material, and old investigative theories. The goal was not simply to repeat what previous investigators had done. It was to determine whether modern science and decades of accumulated information could reveal connections that had been invisible in the 1980s. Among the people investigators wanted to question was Hedrick. By this point, Hedrick was 72 years old and had serious health problems. Yet investigators believe his knowledge could be crucial if he had participated in the deaths, or even witnessed what happened. His account might explain some of the mysteries that had survived for more than 40 years. In March 2026, investigators approached Hedrick while he was receiving medical care. They wanted answers about the Calder Road murders. They wanted to know what he knew about Laura Miller and Audrey Cook, and they wanted to understand whether he had played a role in moving or concealing their remains. Then something happened that transformed the investigation. Hedrick died on March 21st, 2026, shortly after investigators questioned him. His death meant that prosecutors could no longer place him before a jury. Any opportunity to confront him with evidence, question his statements, or obtain a formal confession disappeared with him. For families who had waited decades, it was another devastating turn. But investigators were not finished. Attention shifted toward a man named James Dolphs Elmore Jr. Elmore had known Hedrick for many years. He lived in the Bay Cliff area and had a criminal history that included drug and violence-related offenses. More importantly, according to investigators, Elmore had information about the Calder Road cases that went beyond what an ordinary outsider should have known. The connection became particularly significant because Elmore had contacted Tim Miller, Laura's father, years before the 2026 indictment. Miller had spent decades searching for answers. He had also founded Texas EquuSearch, an organization devoted to helping locate missing people. His work had taken him across the country, but Laura's disappearance remained deeply personal. When Elmore approached him, Miller listened. According to Miller, Elmore wanted to talk about old memories and claimed that he had information about Hedrick. Over a period of years, the two men met repeatedly. Elmore reportedly described events connected to the oil field and pointed out locations associated with Hedrick and the area where the women were found. For Miller, the conversations were disturbing. Some of the information Elmore provided appeared to involve details that had not been publicly discussed. That did not automatically make Elmore's account true, but it gave investigators another reason to examine what he was saying. Elmore allegedly told Miller that Hedrick had been involved in the death of Laura Miller, and that Elmore himself had helped with the aftermath. The precise allegations would later become part of a criminal indictment. The prosecution's theory was startling. According to the indictment, Elmore had allegedly prepared a vial of cocaine for Hedrick to administer to Laura. Prosecutors alleged that this contributed to Laura's death and formed the basis of the manslaughter charge against Elmore. The allegation was not that Elmore had necessarily been the person who physically killed Laura. Instead, prosecutors accused him of recklessly contributing to her death. That distinction matters because manslaughter and murder are legally different offenses. A murder allegation requires proof of a particular mental state and conduct, while manslaughter can involve reckless behavior that causes another person's death. The indictment therefore presented a specific theory about Elmore's alleged role. Prosecutors also accused him of helping conceal evidence connected to Laura and Audrey. The alleged disposal of remains was central to the case. If Elmore helped Hedrick move or conceal the bodies, prosecutors argued he could be held responsible for tampering with evidence even if he was not charged as the primary killer. For the first time, investigators appeared to have a potential bridge between two victims. Laura Miller disappeared in 1984. Audrey Cook disappeared in 1985. Their remains were discovered in the same General Calder Road area in 1986. Now prosecutors were alleging that the same circle of men had been connected to the aftermath of both deaths. But there was an important limitation. Elmore had not been charged with murdering Audrey Cook. He faced a felony evidence tampering charge related to her death. The distinction became even more important because the Texas killing fields contain many cases that remain unresolved. The indictment did not suddenly solve all of them. It did not prove that Hedrick killed every woman found along the corridor. It did not prove that Elmore participated in every disappearance. And it did not establish that the 4 Calder Road victims were all killed by the same person. Instead, prosecutors were presenting a narrower theory supported by the evidence they believed they could take to court. That cautious approach reflected the difficulty of prosecuting crimes more than 40 years old. A prosecutor can have a strong suspicion, but suspicion is not enough. The state must prove its allegations beyond a reasonable doubt. Old cases require careful reconstruction. Investigators must explain where evidence came from, why witnesses are credible, and how physical evidence connects the accused to the alleged crime. The passage of time creates additional